In this video, we're going to implement the unsubscribe endpoint. Let's get down to it. So it's going to be a post request with a route name of unsubscribe. And it's going to have an unsubscribe handler that we haven't yet implemented. So what I'm going to do is actually comment this out, and once we finish all the work, I can uncomment this out and try it out. The first thing I want to do is I want to head over to the email file or the email API module and go to the bottom of the file and export a let's see, remove from mailing list function, which is going to be async. It's also going to take it's also going to take an email, promise, and it's also going to give us an outcome. So in the meantime, I won't implement this just yet, and I want to think about the similarities between this function and the remove from mailing list function. So one of the things I already noticed is both of them take an email. The other thing I noticed is that both of them return an email API outcome. So by seeing those similarities, I start to think about maybe there's a shared type that I can create. The other thing I know is that I'm going to need to send data to this endpoint. So if I go to, I think by just searching remove, unless I'm in the wrong, yeah, I'm in the wrong page. Remove, there we go. Remove a member, or unsubscribe. Right, put. So it's a put request. Updates a mailing list member with the given properties. So this is what we want to do. We want to have a way to say that someone is no longer subscribed, like this. So we're going to be doing a put request with this data and this value. And I start seeing even more shared functionality. So for example, in this function, I'm going to be doing the exact same thing. I'm going to be creating a form, and I'm going to be also appending to this form. Subscribed is no. So between these two functions, we can see, between these two functions, we can see that I'm inverting the subscribe value. The one distinction that I'm seeing, well, there's two slight distinctions here. The first one being the endpoint itself. So here, I have to not provide a member email. So when I'm creating a subscription, right, when someone is being added to the list, their email is part of the body of the request. Whereas in the update endpoint, to mark someone as unsubscribed, the email is part of the path. So that's something that's slightly different. By the way, I'm realizing that this naming is not very accurate. Unsubscribe user from mailing list. Because I'm not removing them from the mailing list, I'm not deleting them, I'm just unsubscribing them to make sure that I never send that email again. So with that said, we can start. So I'm going to actually do a naive implementation, or I'm going to basically copy a bunch of code first. And then once I copy the code, I'm going to start refactoring to start having sort of like a, what's it called? Dry. So dry is an acronym for do not repeat yourself, to clean things up and have shared types between these two functions. So what I can do is I can basically copy all this for now and clean things up a bit as I go. So we got the same mailing list, and we have this a similar or the same root URL or base URL, except here I'm going to need to append the email. And the other thing that changes is that instead of a post request, we have a put request. Let me zoom or scroll up. So we have at the endpoint the form, we have the same credentials, we have the same call to get headers, and then if something goes wrong, we map the unknown error into a email API outcome. Otherwise, we return success. Let me double check here if there's anything else I'm missing. That seems about right. So let's leave it at that for now. And what I can do is go into my routes folder and create a unsubscribe file. Oh, wrong file. Let's go here. And I can immediately import this. Unsubscribe user from mailing list. And it's actually going to be very similar to the subscribe handler that we had already. Let me close this. So we're going to need the same validator. So recall from the last video that a create route function takes a validator, and if the data that it's validating is correct or is valid, it returns the data. Otherwise, the validator will return null. So that's the first argument to create route. And the second argument is a function that takes that data, that it just validated it, and does something with it that has to be asynchronous. It also needs to return a handler result. So that's why I'm calling this function into handler result. Actually, if I hover over it, you can see the type. It takes an outcome from the email API and returns a handler result. So now we reduce the boilerplate of our function as much as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn this into a utility so that I don't have to re-implement it. I'm going to cut this, and I'm going to go to the utils file, and I'm going to paste it here. Maybe above here. Oh, whoops. I have to, there we go. Whoops. Okay. The other thing I need to do is import validator from the router file. There we go. Router. Oh, validator. That's what I meant to do. And the other thing is importing validator. So let me do that. Perfect. Let me go back here, and this gets simplified even more. So if I go to unsubscribe, it's going to be importing this same set of utilities. And we also need to import from router the create route function. So with that, I can call create route email validator, and then I have a callback function email that does something, which is going to be unsubscribe user from mailing list with the email and dot then into handler result. So with that, we've already implemented our unsubscribe handler. And if I go to index, I can comment this out and we can try it out. So I'm going to go into the functions folder to run my watch script. I don't have that set up yet. And I'm also going to boot up the emulator. So let me do that as well. There we go. I'm going to rename this tab to emulator, and I'm going to rename this to TSC watch. Okay, there's an import I forgot to add, so let me do that. Import unsubscribe handler from routes unsubscribe. There we go. Let me double check with the compiler. Things are good. Now we should be all right. So I have Postman here. I keep opening Postgres, even though I don't mean to. Okay, there we go. So I have this. I'm going to copy this endpoint or this request, and I'm going to rename it to unsubscribe. And I'm going to use my local environment variables, unsubscribe, and let's try it out. So let's see if, let's actually test out a complete flow, because I do not think we're handling a not found yet. So let me first call the subscribe endpoint. And what do we get? We get a conflict locally. That's interesting. I wasn't expecting that. Generally, the emulator will sort of clean its cache. Oh, what am I saying? Yeah, it's calling Mailgun. Right. So I do have a whole bunch of emails already inside of my mailing list. So what I can try to do is go straight to removing one of them. So let me just copy an email. So for example, bob@starbucks.com, and I'm going to copy or paste that into here. All right, so we're going to call the unsubscribe endpoint. It's going to be a post request to my local emulator. Let's try it out. There we go. So it's already working. And if I refresh, Bob at Starbucks should not be subscribed. And it is. So why is that? Let's check it out. Let me just go to unsubscribe or email. Oh, I passed in an incorrect parameter. So interestingly, the Mailgun API ignores unknown arguments silently, which maybe not the smartest idea from an API standpoint. But let's try it out. So that should have recompiled. And now it worked. Hopefully. So let's refresh. And now Bob is unsubscribed. Perfect. So we have a ton of code duplication here. Basically, it's a line for line duplicate. So what we're going to start doing is generalizing this API. The first obvious opportunity to generalize is to move this mailing list this mailing list variable. Really struggling this morning. Should sip on some coffee. The first thing I want to do is extrapolate that variable as a top level constant. So I'm going to say mailing list is equal to the value here. So I'm simply going to cut it and paste it here. Now we've simplified one more thing. And then the other thing I'm seeing is that there's a creation of an endpoint that's kind of like partially already created. So we could have something like a function that takes a path and generates an endpoint. So what I'm going to call it is create endpoint, and it's going to take a path that's a string, and it's going to return a full endpoint. And we're going to use this root URL here. We're going to do I want to include this? I'm going to include the /. There we go. And path. Perfect. So now we have a function that will create an endpoint for us. So if I were to do this, whoops. So we have a function called create endpoint that takes our mailing list. So that's starting to be cleaned up already. I can remove this, and let's see. And this can be removed all the way up to here, because if I go to the definition, yep. Okay. So then again, same idea. Specify the mailing list. And there we go. We've simplified this function. Now there's the creation of a form and also Axios. So how would we go about generalizing this? The way that I thought about this is that there's these two operations with Mailgun that we have so far. You know, one of them is let's say type operation, and they're either subscribe or unsubscribe. Okay, and based on those two things, we can infer two things. The first one is the URL path is going to be different based on the operation, right? So for subscribe, it's this. For unsubscribe, it's this. Okay, so that's one thing you can infer based on that, based on this type. And the other thing is the data. So, oh, sorry, not the data. What am I saying? The data is going to be the same. The email is going to be the only thing that we care about. The subscribe value is going to be hard-coded. But the other thing that does change is the HTTP method. Okay, so in one case it's going to be post, and then in the other one it's going to be put. So I want to simplify all of this and sort of like not deal with the details of all this sort of construction of the data and whatnot. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to have a function called create, let's see, const create, how do I want to do this? Let's see here. Right. So before I start implementing a function, I want to actually talk about an interface that represents these values. So these values I just talked about. So I would maybe call this Mailgun API data, and I would have an endpoint, which is a string, and I would have a form, which is form data, and then lastly we have an HTTP method. Okay, which I mentioned is either going to be post or put. So again, if you specify just this, you can end up with this. Well, and also an email. Okay, so let's see what that would look like. Create Mailgun API data takes a operation, let's say operation, and an email, which is a string, and it returns a Mailgun API data. Whoops. Okay, so let's see how I would go about doing this. The first thing is the form, right? Regardless of whether the operation is for subscribe or unsubscribe, you're going to have a form. And then the next thing I can do is say if op equals subscribe. I can start moving all of this info from line 43 into here. Right? Whoa, what am I doing? Okay. And the other thing is the API request itself. So we can do return, and it was, so we had endpoint this, and we had form. Well, let's just add it like that. Maybe add it to the top here, and then HTTP method is a post. Okay, so this is the data for the subscribe API call, and because we only have one other variant in our type, I'm simply going to use a else clause, and we know that this is now for unsubscribe. And by the way, before I keep adding more code or writing more code, I just want to point out that this is an example of an algebraic data type. We have a few examples, and actually this HTTP method call is another example where you have quote unquote an algebra of different values. And we'll see how we can keep using these sort of algebraic data types to build type-safe systems or error handling, that sort of thing. But yeah, like I mentioned before that I was going to talk about algebraic data types. That's all they are. It's nothing crazy, nothing fancy. It's either the sum of two values. So for example, this type represents the sum of subscribe and unsubscribe, or you could have the union. So something that you see a lot is you have like two, or like combined TU is equal to T and U. Okay, so if I do type person, it could be like name string and age number. What am I doing? Type person is equal to combined. There we go. And if I hover over person, it's going to be the union of those two things. So a person is something with a name and an age. This is also an algebraic data type. So there's either the sum or the union of two values. And so as you familiarize yourself with those concepts, you can start leveraging them to create type-safe systems. I think actually in my env.ts there might be an example. Actually, no. We'll keep using them throughout the videos. So let's see here. Back to creating the create Mailgun API data function. So here we will do form.append subscribed is no. And we can return already here. It's going to be form endpoint, same as below here. So let me grab this here. And where were we? There we go. Lastly, there we go. HTTP method is going to be a put request. So with that, we've created a nice way, like sort of abstracted away all the little details of sending data to these different endpoints or constructing an API request for those different endpoints. So I can get rid of this, I can get rid of this, and all that's left now, as we can see, is this Axios request. So again, this is basically copy pasted. It's identical for the most part. So the last thing we can do is maybe have one additional function called create request that again takes our operation and an email, and instead it's going to send a promise email API outcome. Okay, so what I want to do here is I want to leverage this function under the hood, this create Mailgun API data under the hood. So I'm going to say create Mailgun API data op email, and here I can destructure this object, and I can do form endpoint and HTTP method. So these variables are now declared as part of this function call. So let's see here. The next thing I want to do is return a Axios call, which is going to take a configuration object. So this is slightly different from the call we had before. Okay. Instead of calling the specific HTTP method as a method of Axios, I'm going to specify the method as part of a configuration object. So here I can say method, I believe, there we go, is HTTP method. Headers, I can say form.getHeaders. And data is the form itself as well. And then lastly, there's a URL. Which is our endpoint. Let me double check. What else are we missing? We're missing auth. So let's specify auth as well. Username is API. Whoa, what did I do here? Username is API. And password is same as before, Mailgun API key. Okay, so now we're getting type errors, which is fine for now. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove all this and also remove all this. There we go. And the last thing is to map the Axios promise to what we want it to be, which is an email API outcome. So in this case, it's going to be a success. In this case, it's going to be a catch. And we have this utility function that we had before that we can call here. So now we've generalized all the Mailgun API operations into this nice cohesive API. And in here, I can do create request. Operation is going to be subscribe with my email. Pretty nice, huh? Create request. Whoops. There we go. If we wanted to get really fancy, we could actually query this function. So this this function that takes two arguments could be a function that takes one argument, operation, and returns another function. So for example, I could do the following. And by doing that, I can omit basically all of this information. So remember that this function, add subscriber to mailing list, is a function that takes an email and returns an email API outcome. And same with this one, it takes an email and returns an email API outcome. So if I really wanted to, yeah, I could omit this argument. I could also omit all of this. And there we go. This is exactly the same as before. Behaves exactly the same. So we can try it out. I'm just going to check my compiler. Let's see. So no errors. I'm going to go to Postman and I'm going to subscribe just to double check and make sure there aren't any breaking changes. So Giorgio at hello.com. I'm going to call this. There we go. Let's double check. Perfect. And can I call that same or use the same email to unsubscribe? We get a conflict. That's interesting. Unsubscribe. Whoops, that's why. So let's try that again. And if I go here, Giorgio is now unsubscribed. So that's that. I want to see what actually happens. So one thing I haven't planned for is what happens if you try to unsubscribe again. So let's see. this might actually be idempotent. So you might get an OK. Yep, it's true. So, or it returns an OK. So that's okay. I'm wondering what happens if I remove the user. So I'm going to delete this user completely, and I'm going to call that endpoint again. So we get a 500. The reason is we haven't dealt with that situation where the user doesn't exist. We might actually get some logs here. There we go. 404 not found. So this is interesting. I'm wondering why we're not dealing with 404s here. Let's see here. So we return here. So the nice thing with this approach as well is that there's a narrowed set of places where things can go wrong. So there we go. Unknown Axios error, email API. There we go. So the issue is because we haven't dealt with a 404. And actually, you can see in our enum that anything that isn't success or conflict is going to be all grouped together into unknown. So if we wanted to, we can quickly implement not found. And all I would do here is I would say if error question mark response status equals 404, return a email API outcome of not found. Okay, and this is the beautiful thing about this TypeScript app that we've built. Because we've not taken shortcuts to do typecast or to use any types, because everything is strongly linked together in this sort of like puzzle that is also modular, so it's not like coupled necessarily, we're going to get type information around new features that we added. All right, so remember, I added this new feature where like now the system is going to be aware of the fact that Mailgun returns 404 errors, or that there's a situation where Mailgun will say this is not found. The compiler is going to say, hey, you need to now handle that feature in this other file. So let's go over to utils, and let's deal with that right now. So now I can say case email API outcome not found, return not found. Perfect. Now we get no compiler errors, and when I call this same endpoint, we get not found. Beautiful. Is there anything else I want to cover in this video? No, I think that's it. So I'm going to deploy to Firebase, and the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tag this as video 6. In the next video, we're going to cover the sending of the newsletter itself. All right.